Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the best recordings of Beethoven's Missa Solemnis. Get ready, folks. Pile on, because it's going to come, and everyone's going to want to talk about it. Talk, because this is one of those pieces that more people talk about than listen to. It has such a fearsome reputation. It's mystical. It's late Beethoven. It's atrociously difficult to perform. It's much harder than the Ninth, which is really kind of to be expected because it's longer, and it has the chorus participating throughout and the soloist participating throughout, and it's late Beethoven. You're never quite sure with late Beethoven whether what you're hearing is the work of a genius or if it's simply insane. And the Missa Solemnis has more of those simply insane moments than a lot of other late Beethoven, and it's on a much grander scale. So it's just one of those things. And I don't know. I think one of the problems with it has been the fact that when people review it, when critics such as moi talk about the Missa Solemnis, they feel so intimidated themselves. They feel they have to make a profound statement, and they have to say something really smart. I mean, really, really, really smart. And the really, really smart thing for critics usually takes the form of nitpicking stupid details that don't matter, or even emphasizing things that do matter, but blowing them up out of all proportion. I mean, nothing ever goes 100% in a big choral work with four soloists and orchestra. Never. There's usually one of the soloists is a weak link. I mean, it has to be, right? Or the soloists are great, but the chorus isn't great. Or the chorus is great, but the orchestra is a little bit off. Or the conductor, there's just too much that can go wrong. So something normally is a tad off kilter. And like anything in the art world, I mean, perfection is impossible, and you have to simply overlook some of the blemishes sometimes to just to enjoy the work, to sit back and enjoy the music. For years and years and years, I was so intimidated by this piece. I hated it. I didn't want to listen to it. I would put it on. I would fall asleep. I couldn't pay attention to it. I thought it didn't have any really good tunes. I mean, and they're just all screaming and yelling. And let's face it, Beethoven's writing for the four soloists is hideous. His vocal writing is difficult at the best of days, but those four soloists all screaming at once. Oh my God. Even if they're all great, it manages to make it sound ugly. You just want them to get over it. And then gradually, as my life wore on over the decades, I began to just take the piece on its own terms and let my own understanding bubble to the surface, where it had been ruthlessly suppressed by too many years of reading criticism and record reviews, quite frankly, of the Missa Solemnis, because you will never find an honest review of the Missa Solemnis. Trust me when I tell you. I mean, there are some. I mean, but basically, it's almost impossible because it's too forbidding, and critics are too intimidated to really talk about it sensibly, and so they talk bullshit. And it's a terrible thing that's been done to this poor piece of music. I'm not saying that it's just a piece of music like any other. It isn't. It's very, very special. No question about it. It's an extraordinary work of genius, and I'd be the last person to deny that. But because it's a piece of music, it functions by musical rules. That is, it has things like rhythm and balance and texture and dynamics and intonation, and we can talk about these things and we can make sense of them. What I look for in a Missa Solemnis is not an out-of-body experience. I look for depth of emotion, obviously, soloists who don't make me want to run away screaming, louder than they are, that is. I want to hear a great chorus. I mean, I got to hear wonderful choral singing. And this is one of those works where, because Beethoven, let's face it, he was deaf and his orchestration was really kind of quixotic, shall we say, especially in his late pieces, you really want to hear the chorus even more than the orchestra. I mean, the orchestra has to be good, they have to be together, but they're accompanying. And so you've got to have a fabulously well-trained choir that can enunciate the text, which Beethoven does not make easy. I mean, just my sort of test bit of the Missa Solemnis is the Gloria. Because, I mean, there's the end of the Credo, too, which has the world's most difficult choral fugue in it, and it's pianissimo or piano at the end, and it's high, and the intonation always goes to hell, but, I don't worry about that. The Gloria, for me, has all of the oddities of balance. I mean, there's an organ in this piece somewhere. I mean, sometimes you hear it, sometimes you don't. So actually, since the period instrument people got going, the violin solo and the sanctus has also become a bone of contention, because if it gets played like without vibrato or something, it just sounds awful. It used to be a given. It isn't anymore. But the Gloria, the very opening, when the choir comes in with Gloria in excelsis Deo, like that, it's all just scales, right? How hard can it be? Well, do you hear the choral entrance? Most of the time you don't. That's Beethoven's fault. It really is. And they're just these issues with balance, and then of course the whole fugue at the end, which is completely loony, and then the stretto at the end, the coda, where everything goes in double time, and it is one of those pieces that should sound as though everyone is going to die when it's over. When it's done and that last shout of Gloria comes out, if you're not perspiring, something isn't right. It's really that simple. So on the one hand, I can't diminish the work by saying it isn't as great as people say it is, but on the other hand, we should be able to discuss it sensibly, and you should be able to find a performance of it that speaks to you. And whatever that performance is okay. It really is, because it's one of those pieces. You just got to take it as it comes, and sort of cross your fingers and hope for the best, and then decide what parts you like and what parts you don't. And whatever your preference is perfectly fine. It's similar in that respect, I think, to the St. Matthew Passion. That's another, that's 3.5 hours of misery. Pretty misery, granted, but some people just take to it. I never have. I just don't want to be miserable for 3 hours. I don't care how pretty it is. So except for the opening chorus, which is one of the most glorious things in the history of mankind. But, as a whole. And the Missa Solemnis is kind of like that. It's a tough piece to get your brain around, all of it. So yes, I want the Gloria to be magnificent. I want to hear a great violin solo in the Sanctus. And of course, in the Agnus, it has moments. The moments in the Agnus, the increasing terror of the trumpets and drums, the sounds of war approaching, which of course Beethoven stole from Haydn, but made bigger and even more grandiose. And in the final onslaught, it's got to be terrifying, absolutely terrifying. And you're not going to get the terror in the orchestra. That's the thing, because war music in Beethoven's day was chirpy and cheerful. It really was. And, we think, war, it's terrible. We think Mars, the bringer of war, and the planets, da-da-da-da, bum, 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 blah, that kind of horrifying, dissonant, loud. But that wasn't war music. War music, when they really used it for war, was supposed to keep the soldiers' spirits up and keeping them marching together smartly. So it was happy. And Beethoven's war music is happy. It's da-da, da-da, ba-dum, 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 ba-da, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. That's not where the emotion is. And so many people I know talk about, well, you don't hear the trumpets and the drums, it's not loud enough. And, well, it does have to be loud. It has to be as threatening as it can be, but the threat is in the chorus screaming Agnus Dei. That's why the chorus is so important, because if they can't put the fear of God literally into you in that moment, then it doesn't make any difference what everyone else is doing. And so, oddly enough, the Missa Solemnis is not as much a conductor's piece as you might think it is. I did a whole video on why do choral directors make boring conductors. But ironically enough, there are some who've done really good versions of the Missa Solemnis, because they've given us that intensity of diction and emotion behind the words coming from the chorus. And so I want to emphasize that. You really got to love your chorus if you want to get a good Missa Solemnis. So I have 14 recordings of it here, which I think is more than enough to give you a kind of overview of the various interpretive approaches. And I'm sure that you guys will have your own favorites, which you will mention, and there are many good ones that I have not mentioned. I don't want to rule anyone out. Because like I said, this is one of those pieces where you pays your money and you takes your chances. Everyone gives it their best shot. There are no unserious performances of the Missa Solemnis, though I think there are some very atrocious ones. A lot of them coming recently from the period instrument crowd, but I've got some good ones in that department too. So let's get started. I have to start with the performance that's going to be the most frustrating because most of you will never be able to hear it since it's very, very unavailable at the moment. But it is unquestionably the greatest, most cosmic, most completely mind-blowingly shattering Missa Solemnis that anybody ever did. And it's this one that was in the George Sell box. That was gone. You could only get it from the Cleveland Orchestra. And it was a live recording with the Cleveland Orchestra and Chorus, which was trained by Robert Shaw, who also trained Toscanini's chorus, who also recorded it himself. There is a whole subcategory of Missa Solemni in which Shaw was a participant. And he deserves a lot of credit for a lot of the great Missa Solemnises that were out there. So, this is just the one. It's so intense and so feverish and so manic. It absolutely captures the madness that was late Beethoven, like no other performance I've ever heard. And it was quite well recorded. And I'm not going to talk about it anymore because you'll all just be like, rending your garments and tearing out your hair and pulling your beards and, if you have them. And it's a shame. I urge the Cleveland Orchestra, since it has its own label now, to go back into its archive and release some of these things separately, especially this Missa Solemnis. There is nothing like it in the history of Missa Solemnicity. So, Missa Solemnitude, whatever it is. Anyway, that's just the situation, and I will hear no contrary opinion about that. There can be none. So now I'm going to talk about recordings you might actually be able to find that actually exist in today's world, and we'll take it from there. And if anybody finds that Zeld, if it's available somehow, do let everyone know. Please do let everyone know. All right, first let's start with the historical stuff, because you do have to talk about two historical recordings by the same conductor, Toscanini. Now, Toscanini is really a hot Missa Solemnis guy. This was one of the sort of in classical lore, Toscanini's Missa Solemnis was a big deal. Why? Because Furtwängler never did it. As he used to say, the Missa Solemnis is impossible. It can't be played. It's too cosmic. It's too, in other words, he couldn't do it. He just didn't have the chops to pull it off. And so there is no Furtwängler Missa Solemnis out there that I'm aware of anyway. I'm not the ultimate authority on all things Furtwängler, so who knows. But Toscanini, we have two of them. And the better of the two is the earlier one. This is from 1939-40, and it's on Music and Arts, and with Zinka Milanov and Jussi Björling and Igor Kipnis and what's this guy's name? Bruna Castagna. It's really, really fabulous. And it's not bad sounding, considering 39, 40, whenever it was. It's amazingly listenable. It's still, it's an old mono air check. It's going to sound compressed and kind of dim, but it has tremendous impact for what it is. And you hear quite a bit. The chorus is backward, so you don't hear the chorus as much as you'd like to. It's much better here in the NBC recording, which has the chorus trained by Robert Shaw. It's the Robert Shaw Chorale. And this is also very, very good. It doesn't have quite the sort of white-hot intensity and tension that this one does. The only person who matched this one was Zell for just, sort of edge of your seat, what's going to happen next, shock and awe. But this is awfully good, too. It's from 1953. And so Toscanini is somebody you should definitely consider if you're a big Missa Solemnis fan. I mean, there's some people who just, just drool and pant over this thing and live for the Missa Solemnis. I was never one of those people. I'm much more selective and picky, but that's for you to decide, obviously. But now we've done the historical thing. I want to talk about the period instrument folk, and I have 4 recordings that are really quite good. They're not all period instrument, but they're that style. Let's just say the period instrument folk. Now, one of the problems with the period instrument approach, generally speaking, is that it makes the work sound small. And one thing the Missa Solemnis is not is small. Even if you're using small forces, it has to sound big, especially at those cosmic moments. The Gloria is one of those pieces where Beethoven is contrasting hysterical fortissimo shouts, theoretically with an organ somewhere, to whispered pianissimi, and they just alternate without any kind of contrasting like crescendos or transitions. They're screaming, then they're whispering, then they're screaming, then they're whispering at the opening of it anyway. And so these teeny tiny period instrumenty performances not only sound small, but of course the instruments are played like the violins without vibrato and whatnot, so they sound even smaller than they need to. But I have 4 here, which I've actually appreciated. I haven't loved them, perhaps in one way or another. One is David Zinman with the Tonhalle Orchestra of Zurich. This is a performance of amazing clarity, except for the fact that the trumpets and drums are not as prominent as they ought to be. But it is amazingly well sung by a chorus who was never identified. I think this is fascinating. It's the Tonhalle Orchestra of Zurich with Fritz Naff, chorus master. What he's the chorus master of, no one will tell us, because it doesn't say anywhere, but it's really one hell of a good chorus. And you have that clarity that you really want. Now, some people will find this performance, which is very quick, it's like 65 minutes, typical performances run to 75 to 80 minutes. They will find this ice cold and completely expressionless. And I don't think it's that. I think it's a different style. And it's a very, very fine example of that style, aside from the trumpets and drums, which just need to be more. But really fine singing and tremendous clarity. You'll hear a lot of stuff in this performance, and that's always fun to do, especially if you know it well. So Zinman is worth considering. Also worth considering in the smallish, period-y kind of way is Helmut Rilling. And, Rilling is one of those guys who everybody takes for granted. He was just sort of a Kapellmeister, and his Bach was kind of, when the period instrument people came along, he was just superseded. He was canceled. He was politically incorrect. I don't know. But one thing Rilling always got was fabulous choral singing, and he always chose wonderful, wonderful soloists, which he has here. He's got Pamela Coburn, Florence Quivar before her Quivar became a quiver, and Aldo Baldin and Andrea Schmidt. And I got to tell you, I respond to this performance a lot because it's very, very digestible. Some people don't want it to be digestible. They want all the gnarly, ugly stuff emphasized. But this is a very, very enjoyable performance. And it's not inexpressive, and it's not cool in any way. It's just, again, it's the approach, the smaller approach, which is probably more typical, maybe, of what would have happened in Beethoven's day. Not necessarily what Beethoven would have wanted to happen had he had carte blanche to do it all the way he wanted. But it's on Hensler, and it's quite good, and it's okay. Another one, this is very curious. Harnoncourt's last recording. This is the I have to do one more Missa Solemnis before I die recording. And it has a strange, I heard it the first time. I hated it. I thought it was just soft-edged and smushy, and Harnoncourt at his Harnoncorniest, just trying to be rhetorical and effective for his own sake. My colleague at Classics Today, Bob Levine, just loved it because he found it to be just one of the most beautifully devotional performances. which is ironic coming on period instruments, right? But Harnoncourt he was a romantic. He really was. He was never a cool Baroque character. He was a passionate romantic in everything he did. Nowhere more so than in the way he handled early music, with all of the kookiness of Leopold Stokowski. So this Missa Solemnis, with the Concentus Musicus and the Arnold Schoenberg Choir, it's very, very beautiful, but it's not very exciting. It just isn't. Even though it's quick, even though it's curious. There's nothing quite like it. So it's a very personal approach to it by a conductor who I think, at the end of the day, earned the right to have his personal approach. And I've come around since I first heard it and thought it was nauseating to think it's a personal approach. Now, whether you find it nauseating or not, again, it's the Missa Solemnis. There's one for everyone. So it's worth considering if you come across it on your daily peregrinations through the digital domain and download sites and things. Sample it first and see what you think. However, I do have a period instrument performance, and it may surprise you, but it does for reasons I'm almost hesitant to say. But it's John Eliot Gardner. I talked about this before. Gardner is a really good choral accompanist. I mean, that's what he does, right? With the Monteverdi Choir, that's how he made his career. That's how he started. He does that usually really well. I mean, his Verdi Requiem was fabulous. His Berlioz, early Mass was great. He did some just wonderful things. A lot of his Bach was terrific. You got to give the guy props for doing what he does best. And this Missa Solemnis is on the cool side. It is. But it has the necessary discipline and I think excitement, and he hits the big moments, and I think the performance meant something to him. I think he takes the work on its own terms, and he gives it the old college try, and it comes off really, really well on the whole. So Gardner, I mean, of all the period instrument guys, I think this one best sort of straddles that divide between the basic, lesserness of the approach and the bigness of the work itself. He certainly does not diminish the piece in this performance, and he gets superb results from the singers, and I am very impressed by that Missa Solemnis. I still am, and I'm happy to say so. Good for you, dear John. Okay, now we're going to talk about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 or so normal performances. That is, with regular choirs and orchestras. One that I found most disappointing. This is my sort of, just so I can throw in another sort of a dud that I really was looking forward to. I really, really was Marek Janowski. Let me do it this way so you can see this part. Marek Janowski, I really admired his Beethoven cycle, a lot of it. He's another conductor. He's very cool. He's very intellectual in his approach. And so I wasn't expecting, big thrills, although he does kind of peg the return of the battle music and the Agnus Dei pretty well. But I think the problem here, it's pentatone, is the sonics. I wanted to hear this initially because you've got the Berlin Radio Orchestra and the MDR Radio Choir of Leipzig, the Leipzig Radio Choir, the one founded by Herbert Kegel, one of the great choirs in the history of the universe. I just wanted to hear him sing it. But they're in this cavernous acoustic, and the whole thing sounds like a garble. I mean, it's just echoey, and the woodwinds are too far back, and the choir is singing out into this gaping void. I don't think that the sonics or the engineering flatters the interpretation at all. So I'm just telling you, avoid this pentatone Janowski Missa. I was sort of, such a missed opportunity. But the MDR Leipzig Radio Choir will redeem itself shortly. I promise you. So, one that we really need to consider, because I just, the rest of these, they're sort of conductors who interest me, whose view of the work I wanted to hear. Not that it's going to be perfect, but it's worth hearing. Kubelik. This has recently been reissued. It's the Missa Solemnis plus
the ninth.
And Kubelik loved conducting big choral works. And this is, you wish in this performance, it's a live performance, you wish that it were just a hair faster, sort of consistently all the way through. But oh, he was such a wonderfully warm, humane artist. And you can hear the commitment and the affection all the way through the performance. And he's got the chorus of the Bavarian Radio, which is another one of those great German radio choirs. The men are particularly fabulous. Usually, you hear the sopranos screaming all the time, and the tenors and basses, not so much. Boy, do they wail in this performance. If you want to hear those bass lines, this is a good performance. It's on Orfeo. It's like budget priced out.
The ninth
was so, but the Missa is much better. And I was happy to listen to this again. I did actually a lot of listening for this talk because, like all critics intimidated by the Missa Solemnis, I'm trying very hard not to make a fool out of myself in talking about the work. I mean, I may do it anyway, but it won't be because I wasn't listening. And that's the point. So Kubelik on Orfeo is worth thinking about. Another one that this is terribly underrated, this recording, but I think it's necessary for some of the reasons already enumerated. Robert Shaw with the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra and Chorus. Now, Robert Shaw was the chorus director behind Toscanini and Zell and behind himself. So if you've got those others, in a way, you have Shaw as well. He doesn't sound anything like those others. Shaw was a much more sedate conductor than either Toscanini or Zell. He just was. But there is something of their tension in the big moments in here. I think his pacing of the Gloria, for example, is masterful. It begins rather slowly, and you think, oh gosh, it's not going to amount to anything. But by the time you get to the end, it's roaring like a tornado. So he had a conception. He was a tremendous musician, the greatest choral trainer of the entire 20th century, and he has a stunningly fine chorus and a wonderful lineup of soloists. He was another one like Rilling, who usually got very good soloists. They're Sylvia McNair, Janice Taylor, John Aller, and Tom Krause. And these are and it comes with the Mozart C minor Mass on Telarc. Really, really an important performance and a very beautiful one. It is a traditional performance. That is, it's somewhat soft-edged. It couldn't be further away from the period instrument folks, but it is magnificently musical and incredibly beautiful and incredibly well recorded. So, you have to talk about Shaw when you talk about the Missa. You just do, at least recordings of it. Then we have two Bernsteins. Now, one of the paradoxes about Leonard Bernstein is that, for all, again, that people talk about him as being this sort of crazy, emotional, narcissistic showman, blah, 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 none of which was, it was true visually, but it wasn't true musically. He nailed certain pieces. He just did. He had them in his blood. It was that way with his Haydn. Things that somehow you wouldn't expect. His Schumann, which was amazing, always, and his Missa Solemnis. He always did a great Missa Solemnis. There is a certain dispute among Bernstein aficionados as to whether or not his earlier one is better than his later one. They're both terrific in their way. The earlier one is the one that's a little bit more exciting, a little bit rougher edged. And with today's taste for period performances, rougher edge is generally considered a good thing. So his New York Philharmonic one is wonderful, if that's what you're into. His remake with the Concertgebouw got rave reviews when it came out. Everyone went crazy about it. Now with period instrument stuff out, people are less crazy about it. But you got to wonder, if people are crazy about something, what's changed? Not the performance. It's still a great performance, and it's with the Concertgebouw. It's live, with Edda Moser, Hannah Schwartz, Renee Colo, and Kurt Moll. The soloists in this one are Eileen Farrell. Yay! Eileen Farrell. Ugh, one of the, sort of great under-recorded sopranos. A real Brunhilde Wagnerian, serious dramatic soprano. She's really good in this. Carol Smith Richard Lewis and Kim Borg with the Westminster Choir, which was never anyone's favorite choir. But it's a very, very fine performance, too. So, what's the chorus in this one? It's a couple of them, isn't it? It's the Hilversum Radio Chorus. So, either of Bernstein's, it's a facet of his personality that I think is wonderfully interesting, and which, of course, always makes the Bernstein haters nervous, because someone who is merely a showman and who is shallow and somehow superficial and hard on sleeve and not profound isn't supposed to do a great Missa Solemnis. But he did. Twice. So there. And then we come to the two finalists, one of which I am sure you will not be surprised by. And that, of course, is Klemperer. Klemperer was, along with the German Requiem, Missa Solemnis was the sort of the reference recording throughout the 1960s, and for good reason. It is magnificently sung. It is magnificently played. The tempi are Klemperer. That is, it's not going to win any Speed Demon awards, but it's not a slow performance, because as usual with Klemperer, he tends to take his time. I'm trying to look at the overall timing, if I can find it here, which I can't. He tends to take his time in the quicker stuff, which isn't a bad thing in this piece. I mean, if the chorus has time to enunciate the text and they sing with the necessary rhythm always being at a premium in choral writing. It's like the organ. It's, mass voices don't naturally have rhythm. So you have to really hit the consonants and articulate the rhythms. And if you have to go a little slower in order to do that, the music will sound more exciting. It's not about speed. It's about rhythm and articulation. And they have rhythm and articulation in this fabulous performance with Elisabeth Soderstrom. Yeah, we love her too. Marga Hofgen, Waldemar Kment, and Martti Talvela. A great lineup of soloists who still manage to sound ugly thanks to Beethoven when they all sing together, but that's always true of Beethoven's solo quartet writing. But gosh, this is great Beethoven. I mean, Klemperer was just so into it. And, with his forward, all the things that he did well, his forward wind balances and his just total, complete, barefaced honesty of expression. It's moving. It's tremendously moving. So you should still hear this, and it was wonderfully well recorded. It sounds fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. I listened to this in my car. Blasphemous though that may sound, it really works well if you're on the road. I think road music, the Klemperer Missa Solemnis. However, there is a performance I've heard, and it's a relatively new one. And I didn't know what to expect, but it absolutely blew me away, and that is Herbert Blomstedt. The great Herbert Blomstedt, who now is 175 and is in the middle of doing a rather boring Brahms cycle with the same orchestra, the Leipzig Gewandhaus. He really, he's like Klemperer, only faster, in the sense that there's just that complete simplicity and directness to his conducting, where he doesn't have to make any points. And he never draws attention to himself, but he never diminishes the music. He never misses the big moments. He revels in the music's excitement and in its hushed intensity. And he has the Leipzig Radio Choir, the MDR Radio Choir, which is the Leipzig Radio Choir. I mean, something like, they're all the same. But yes, he has the same chorus that so disappointed in the Janowski. And my God, it's fabulously well recorded. It's a live performance again. It has that intensity and excitement and sense of suspense of a live performance. The applause is tracked separately, and they wait until after the final chord has died away before applauding. Thank God. And wow, this is wonderful, wonderful, wonderful stuff. The violin solo and the Sanctus is incredible. The Agnus Dei is frightening. When the chorus comes in, the height of the battle business, you just want to cringe and run away and hide under your bed. It's fabulous. The label is Figaro. It's MDR. It's available. I'm not sure. It's purple. Look for something purple. and you can find it that way. But I was. This is with the Gewandhaus, like I said. I am just so thrilled to hear a modern recording of this intensity and beauty, and it really, I think, gives you the total package. It really does. It's a wonderful testament to Blomstedt, the conductor, who's, we've been talking about a lot in these videos. For so many years, he was regarded as sort of a lovely conductor of Scandinavian music of the second rank, right? Even though he spent all those years in Dresden and made that terrific Beethoven cycle and all kinds of other things. And but his San Francisco legacy is amazing. It needs to be boxed up complete, not in a little selected bits box, Decca. And I just was so happy to hear this performance because, great Missa Solemnis do not come thick on the field. They're rare. And Blomstedt is one of them. So that's my current choice. There may be others, but hopefully this selection will give you kind of a sense of what's out there and will allow you to triangulate the performance that suits you best. Do not feel obliged to love it on first listen, and do not feel that you absolutely have to force it. Take your time. Let the music speak to you, and don't get anxious about it. It took me 30 years to really learn to enjoy the Missa Solemnis. I know there are other people who are greater spirits than I who took to it immediately. But every person is different. Every piece of music is different. And I always detest the fact that people are frightened away from music because they're afraid to let their own opinions be valid for them. So your view is valid. And this is not a piece of music for, everyday listening, unless there's something a little bit off with, well, never mind. We're not going to go there. Just keep on listening. Thank you for joining me. Take care.